All right, hey guys, so we're going to be covering the muscles of the rotator cuff and of the upper arm in this video. But before we touch on those, I want to go back over the deltoid muscle because I forgot to mention in previous videos the origin and insertion of this muscle. And so when we're looking at this muscle, we've got an attachment site right here, specifically on the acromion of the scapula, the scapular spine itself, and then on the anterior side we have the clavicle. And then we have another attachment site down here that's on the deltoid tuberosity of the humerus. And so we know that if we contract our deltoid, we're going to abduct our arm, which is going to move our arm up that way like so. And we know that by naming convention, the origin is the site that stays stationary, and the insertion is the site that's going to move towards the origin. And so just by the movement of shoulder abduction, we can sort of deduce or clarify that this right here is our origin, and then this down here is our insertion. And so those are the origins and the insertions of the deltoid muscle. So now shifting our focus over to the actual rotator cuff itself. So this is a posterior view of the arm if we had removed that deltoid. And so before we even talk about this, I want to kind of go over and say what classifies a group of muscles as being part of the rotator cuff. And so I want to look at this bone chart here, or this bone view of the scapula here real quick. And so we know that if we look here, we probably all recognize that right there is the glenoid fossa. And we probably all also know that the head of the humerus here is actually going to sit and articulate with that glenoid fossa there. So by definition, a rotator cuff muscle is any muscle that's going to essentially attach onto the head of the humerus and going to help stabilize and hold that humeral head into that glenoid fossa. So that is our definition there for what makes a rotator cuff muscle a rotator cuff muscle. Now let's actually go and talk about what are those muscles. And so we've got a mnemonic here. Our mnemonic is sits. And so this is our mnemonic. One thing I'd like to point out is that we've got three muscles that are posterior. So most of our muscles are actually posterior in the rotator cuff. And then we have one muscle here, which is anterior. So the majority of our rotator cuff muscles are going to be located on the posterior shoulder. So we're going to start with the posterior muscles since we have a posterior view here of the arm, and we're going to move our way anterior. But before we do that, I actually want to point out that we have this structure here we can see right here, and that's known as our scapular spine. And if we come over here, we can also see the scapular spine right there. And so we know that if we have a fossa above that spine, and we give that fossa the name the supraspinous fossa, and then we have another fossa beneath that spine, and we give that fossa's name the infraspinous fossa. And so the reason I like to point this out is because this is actually really helpful for the naming of the muscles, because the muscle that sits in that supraspinous fossa, which would be up here, is the muscle that we name the supraspinatus. So I'll just go ahead and quickly highlight this muscle here. But this muscle up here is called our supraspinatus because it's named for its location, which is the supraspinous fossa. And actually, I'll go ahead and now write out our muscles here as we do this. So we've got our first muscle, which is called the supraspinatus. All right, and then we say, well, we've got another muscle that's actually located in that infraspinous fossa that's beneath that spine, and we give this muscle the name infraspinatus. And so this right here is all of our infraspinatus muscle. So that's all of our infra. And I'd also like to point out that this part right here that I'm going to quickly highlight in blue, this is our just extensions of our supraspinatus muscle there. So then, okay, so we've got our infraspinatus, we've got our supraspinatus, and that's the eye there, is the infraspinatus. And then we say, okay, well, look, if we look here, we can actually see a muscle here that's located directly beneath the infraspinatus, and we can call this muscle here teres minor, excuse me. So this is teres minor, and I kind of gave it away, but as we know, by naming convention, if there's a minor muscle, then there is also a major muscle, and we'll talk on what the major muscle is in a second. So if we go ahead and label these, we've got, we'll say 1 is our supraspinatus, 2 is our infraspinatus, and then 3 is our teres minor. And so these are going to be the muscles of, or the posterior muscles of the rotator cuff. We do have an anterior muscle, so we'll actually go ahead and take a look at that here real quick. So this is looking at an anterior view of that shoulder. And actually, if we come over here and look at it, just the bone itself, just like how we had those fossas on the posterior side, we also have our subscapular fossa. And so, again, what's located in that subscapular fossa is going to be our subscapularis, and that's this muscle right here. So this is our final rotator cuff muscle, and it's the only one that's really on the anterior side of that scapula there. And so our final muscle here, we give the name subscapularis. And those are all the muscles of the rotator cuff: supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, subscapularis. So now we can kind of say, okay, so we mentioned that teres minor. Where's teres major? Well, teres major is actually going to be located right here, directly beneath teres minor. And so this muscle right here is going to be called teres major. And the reason we don't classify this as a rotator cuff muscle is because, again, we mentioned all those muscles there in the rotator cuff are functioning to hold that humeral head up here. I'll probably do a different color so we can kind of see it better. Up here into the glenoid fossa. So they're all sort of helping to anchor that and stabilize that joint. Teres major is actually going to anchor down around here onto the neck of the humerus. So it's not actually helping to hold and stabilize that humeral head into the shoulder joint there. So those are our muscles: supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, subscapularis, and then we just mentioned teres major now. So now we're going to shift our attention to the muscles of the upper arm. And so if we come over here and look at this muscle, or this view real quick, and I'll go ahead and erase all this, what we can see here is we've got this nice big muscle here on the back of the arm, and this muscle is pretty much one of the only muscles that we'll talk about on the posterior side of the upper arm, and that is our triceps brachii. Brachii named for the region it's found in, and triceps names for the number of heads. Though we can only see 2 heads on right now in this image, there's 1 and 2. There is actually a 3rd head, we just can't see it on this picture. So that's our triceps brachii. And if we come over here, what we will see is the other big muscle that's on the anterior side of the arm, and that is this muscle right here. And just like how we have a triceps brachii, we call this one our biceps brachii, and I'm sure we're all familiar with this muscle. And so that's our biceps brachii there, and we can see kind of like one head right there and then another head right there. And so that's our biceps brachii. And we can see it right here up underneath. Actually, let me do a different color. So we can see this muscle right here that's kind of sitting up underneath the biceps brachii there. And if we come down, I think I have the image down here, yes. So if we come right here and look at this, we'll point out we've got the triceps brachii right here. Here's our triceps. There's our heads right there. There's our triceps brachii. And then in yellow here, we've got our biceps brachii sitting here on top. So this is on sort of the most anterior side. And we can kind of see underneath that biceps brachii, kind of sandwiched there between the triceps brachii and the biceps brachii, is a muscle that we are going to name the brachialis muscle. So that is going to be this muscle here that's located right in the middle there of our upper arm. And so that's all the muscles of the upper arm that we're going to be touching on. The biceps brachii on the anterior side, the triceps brachii, which is on the posterior side, and then we've got the biceps brachii there, which is located kind of on the anterior surface, but it's in the middle there. And so that's going to be it for the muscles of the upper arm and for the rotator cuff muscles. And I will see you guys back in a future video going over the muscles of the forearm.